Today's discussion will be presented in three sections since we are recording this session for a radio broadcast on Federal News Radio 1500 AM. Our first section will focus on building the business case. Next, we will discuss the criteria used to make a decision on a cloud offering. And lastly, we will explore security and the different cloud models. Feel free to post questions and comments during the session, and we will try to get them answered online. We are particularly pleased to welcome our moderator, Tom Temin, host of the Federal Drive on Federal News Radio 1500 AM. Let me turn over the reins to Tom to begin today's discussion.
Welcome and thanks for joining us. Our guests today are Pamela Dyson. She's the Chief Technology Officer and Deputy CIO at the Securities and Exchange Commission. Zachary Goldstein, the Deputy CIO of the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. Lonnie Anderson, Director of Technology and the CIO at the National Security Agency, CSS. And Susie Adams, Chief Technology Officer at Microsoft Federal. And we have a topic that has been discussed a lot, but because there's such rich material, so much change going on in the cloud area, I think we'll have a lot to talk about today. And I wanted to get right into it with a question for the government panelists first. And that is the idea of making the technical case for cloud computing and also making the business case for cloud computing. I just wanted to get a sense of what comes first in your thinking and planning. Do you do one before the other? Do you do them simultaneously? How does that work? Zach, why don't we start with you?
At NOAA, we probably think of the economic case first because the prime driver for going to the cloud is to be able to get the most technology you can for the money, and while maintaining security, which is always a big consideration. So first we think about, usually it's triggered, by the way, when we're either putting in place a new service, and so we say, well, what are the opportunities? Is there a cloud opportunity out there? If it's an existing function, we look at, are we about to do a technical refresh? In that sense, it's driven by the technology requirement. It's always a functional requirement first, but I think that within the technical life cycle that says when you have to make this decision, you're doing the business case.
Okay, so the business case comes first, and then you decide what's the best technical approach to what it is you want to accomplish for that business case.
Right, well, the technology considerations, and in particular the security considerations, are part of the business case. Right? There are certain things that we simply won't compromise on, and that says where in the cloud we're going. But when you have the option of a private cloud or a public cloud or community cloud, then the private cloud is effectively the option that you go with when you have a high security requirement. And the only time you're not going cloud at all is when, at least in NOAA, is when we have high-performance computing. Our high-performance computing are supercomputers for research and development, for giving you the weather forecast. Those aren't cloud-based. They won't become cloud-based from a technological perspective. So the choice of going to the cloud technologically is almost a given. Mm-hmm. The real question is, what's the business model you're going to take in going to the cloud? Am I going to own the infrastructure and create a private cloud? Am I going to partner with a federal agency or a private sector firm that has adopted unique federal requirements, effectively making a community cloud based on the definition from a security perspective? Or am I going to a pure public cloud where there's no expectation of anything unique for the federal government? So because those are really the choices, and I'm going to the cloud irrespective of that, it does become a business case, subject to very strong security constraints.
Okay, and Pamela, at the SEC, how does that all work?
So likewise, we look at the business case first. Being a regulatory agency, there's not a lot of opportunities to move things to the cloud due to the sensitivity of the data.
Just a quick question. Is EDGAR, that's hosted by the SEC?
That's hosted by the SEC.
Okay.
Now, EDGAR Full Text Search is in the cloud. So we leverage the cloud for that. We leverage a public cloud. It's all public information, public filings with all the attachments. But certainly quantitative analysis, high processing computing are things that we are not ready and cannot move to the cloud. The sensitivity of some of the investigative work that we do would not make us that data available to place in the cloud. But we actively and proactively seek opportunities to move things to the cloud when it makes sense. And when the technology dictates that, yes, this is the way you should go. An example of that is we're looking at moving service to the cloud. Our incident managed service, problem management services, asset management services, our service catalogs, those types of data, we are actively looking at service cloud providers to help us and to support us in that area. We think that's the best leverage of our resources and skill sets, and we would focus on our private clouds for the more proprietary information. So we actually virtualized both of our data centers, our primary and backup data centers. So we have two private clouds that we leverage. And of course, there's the ad hoc solutions in there for example, data analytics. Perhaps we can put the raw data, the metadata in the cloud and do the compilation and the analytics in our private environment. The issues that, of course, with that is, of course, wherever your computing is, your storage needs to be close to that. So we would have to work those types of things out. But we're proactively looking at the SEC at opportunities to leverage the cloud where it makes sense. We have so much data, not enough resources and storage to manage the data. We like the elasticity of the cloud, the agility of the cloud, where we can certainly, for peak investigations, where we have millions and millions of documents, that we can leverage that kind of elasticity. But again, for us, it's really the sensitivity of regulatory information that makes that decision.
Okay, and Lonnie, at the National Security Agency, of course, you have lots of data, lots of metadata, and lots of ongoing activities. Some we know about, some we don't. What is the balance, and how do you decide what's where?
So I want to echo what Zach and Pamela said. I think you make your business case first. Why do you have to go to the cloud? Or do you have to go to the cloud? In some cases, the cloud might not be the right solution. For us, we had internally, to NSA, we had a burning platform, right? There was no more room at the end, if you will. Our legacy relational databases were full. We were adding capabilities to them all the time, trying to basically bolting on additional capacity. We realized that only take us so far. So we actually started an effort back in 2007 to say we need to relook 2007, 2008, we need to relook how we store data. How do we think about storing data? At that same time, Google released open source MapReduce Hadoop and said, this is kind of where we're going. We thought that was a fascinating concept. We took what they released, we put that in research for a while. Meanwhile, we continued down this large acquisition program saying, we've got a problem. We just can't keep bolting on. How do we want to look? At storing data in the future? But it's more about making it accessible to our analysts so that they can use it. And in some cases, they need to be able to do that in near real time. About 2010, we came to the conclusion another relational database, regardless of how big it is, just isn't going to work. So at that point, we went all in on moving to the cloud. And when I say moving to the cloud, literally, we're moving to Google's cloud. So we adopted that same architecture. We put a security wrapper over the top of that. So there's our special sauce. The thing we add is a security wrapper over the top of that. Today, we are still flowing all data into both those legacy repositories and into the cloud. Within the next 12 months, we'll start to shut off those legacy repositories, and you'll see our analysts move to the cloud. Now you make the business case first. Why do you have to do that? What had happened over time is the relational databases had grown so large and become so numerous that when we looked at our analysts' workflow, what we found is they were spending way too much of their time just preparing to do analysis. Having to go in and out of every one of those relational databases and prepare them. In the cloud, you don't need to do that. So when you look at an analyst workflow and you break that down, what we try to do is say, where could we save analysts time? And there's ways to do that in the cloud that you can't do in a series of relational databases. Then there's the economy, right? The economics of the effort. It's just cheaper at the end of the day. So it is cheaper, and that's internal to NSA. You could add to that then what we're doing across the intelligence community called ISIGHT, which is to create a common architecture that we can all leverage. And there's just no way to do that by staying in a series of isolated, federated repositories, if you will.
Okay, I want to return to that whole data question too, but Susie Adams of Microsoft Federal, now that agencies, clearly we can hear they're into the cloud era, it's no longer something people are exploring, but exploring how to do it better and how to do it more extensively. What are the questions you're getting with respect to business cases and technology questions.
Well, I think I'll echo, I mean, this is exactly what they're saying here on the panel is exactly what we're hearing. I mean, the business case absolutely comes first. I mean, we're not in the place or in the world where we have the luxury of just ripping and replacing without a good business case to support it. And the economics are there for the cloud. And so I think what we're seeing is people are looking at the workloads that they have a business case or a justification. Maybe they're end of life. Maybe they need to be expanded. Maybe the databases are full, whatever that business case may be. And then they're turning to the cloud to see if the economics and the security and privacy that the different clouds offer make sense to them. And what we're finding is really dependent on the mission, which pretty much makes sense, and the sensitivity of the data. People are choosing from, private clouds, government, community, public clouds. And then what we're seeing is kind of this move towards community clouds, and not communities that are just government community, but communities, the DoD community, the Intel community, right, communities of interest, which we find quite interesting. And so from Microsoft's perspective, we actually want to be able to support all those modes and let the customer choose how they want to do this. Because at the end of the day, when you move to the cloud, we have this term, the cloud. Everybody thinks it's this mystical thing that sits out there and it's in somebody else's data center. And really what we're doing is putting a layer of abstraction above the existing infrastructure that used to sit in our data centers. Very similar to what we did, if you go back and think of, DOS. I can date myself and say I was a DOS developer and actually, hated the mouse when it came out in Windows. And that's exactly what Windows did. And the operating systems that came out from Apple and others that sat on top of these, legacy client-based systems is we took the complexity out of it. We added a layer of abstraction, right, to be able to have people focus on the mission and on the applications. And so now we're just extending that to the back-end systems that we run in our data centers and taking it up the stack, taking it up the OSI model and saying, you know what, you're not going to be able to flip these bits anymore. You're going to now focus on the mission, and this is going to become, part of the service. And I think we can offer, in a variety of vendors, can offer that regardless of where you want your data to live, because at the end of the day, what we're hearing is data location, data access, right, are the two most important parts of this. And I think that was a big misnomer when we first started talking about cloud 4 years ago.
Okay, and by the way, I was an early adopter of Windows 286. And I was so thrilled to see my screen split in half. I thought, wow, I could get used to this, so I know whereof you come. So I want to talk about data a little bit more, because we talked a lot about relational databases and them getting filled out. And of course, relational databases are columns and rows. There is a lot of data that agencies have and want to use that doesn't fit into relational databases, unstructured data. And so I sense there's a connection between unstructured data use, getting value out of it, and the cloud. And maybe you could explain how that works a little bit. Zachary?
So when I think about the business case, the last topic we just discussed, there's an interesting connection to big data type of applications. So one of the main economic arguments for going to the cloud, when we went to, we were one of the earliest, in fact, we were at the time the largest federal adopter of cloud email and collaboration. We went to Google back in 2011. And we've got a number of other service, software as a service applications. When you do that, you get your people out of the business of touching the iron, touching the software. What does that leave them to do? Well, manage the information. Right, so we're a big owner of lots of unstructured data. There's an entire industry, the weather industry around the world is built on our data and our colleagues' data. AccuWeather doesn't have satellites, they don't have radars, I don't think they have supercomputers. So the data comes out, and how do you expose it? Right, so if you can put it in the cloud and make it available, then you can focus on the metadata management, you can focus on the meaning of the data, you can focus on what you're offering, and you can even focus on things like what's the business model that people will use to get access to this unstructured data, because you're not devoting all of your knowledge and expertise to maintaining the columns and the rows and the software access and all the different layers. So it's an interesting connection, but I do think that by being freed up for our most valuable resource, which is our time, from having to worry about the technology and now being able to focus on the use, the cloud becomes a big enabler to the kinds of data access and innovative uses of data that you're alluding to.
So the metadata almost abstracts the type of data that might be behind it, which could be structured and unstructured mixed up.
Right, and that's not the kind of thing that's easy to automate. Right, I mean, metadata is who developed it? What was its purpose? Where was the satellite when that image was taken? All those things. How old was the instrument that was the sensor? You focus on data. You can focus on data quality. You can focus on who's the user. You can focus on if we can find more creative ways and more cost-effective ways of exposing the voluminous amount of data that one satellite.
Sure.
Just imagine, right? If we can find ways to do that, then we can stimulate the economy. And cloud is one important element in freeing us up to focus on the use of our data as opposed to the mechanics.
And Pamela, before we go to break, give us a brief rundown on the unstructured piece of data and how the cloud enables that to be used better at the SEC.
Right. So that, again, is a process for us simply by the nature of the data that we collect. Certainly at the SEC, we have numerous data collection systems. We've built an enterprise data warehouse where we house all of our unstructured data. And we use Palantir and SAS and a number of analytical tools in the different environments to do analytics over that data. Our next step would be what portion of that data could we move to the cloud and leverage the robustness of the cloud, the economy of scale of the cloud, to run those same types of analytics. Again, it is the nature of the data that we collect that has prevented. So when we made the business decision to deploy an enterprise data warehouse privately as opposed to the cloud, is because we haven't worked through all of the issues around the sensitivity of the data. But that is the next step, the next progression that we're trying to make in terms of now what portions of that data can we move to the cloud to gather just the types of efficiencies that we're talking about.
All right, we're going to take a short break on that note. Our guests today are Pamela Dyson, Chief Technology Officer and Deputy CIO at the Securities and Exchange Commission, Zachary Goldstein, Deputy CIO of the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, Susie Adams, Chief Technology Officer at Microsoft Federal, and Lonnie Anderson, Director of Technology and the CIO at the National Security Agency, CSS. I'm your moderator, Tom Temin, and this is Navigating Tough Choices in Government Cloud Computing, a panel discussion sponsored by Microsoft here on federalnewsradio.com and 1500 AM.